Revelation 21, verses 1 through 4. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. We have been looking over the last several months about the attributes and such of God, and the compound names of God, or some of them anyways. We have looked at Jehovah Jireh, our provider. We have looked at Jehovah Rapha, our healer. Jehovah Nissi, our banner. Jehovah Shalom, our peace. Jehovah Sedek, our righteousness. And Jehovah Shammah, the Lord is there. The last compound name that I want to look at is one that is probably a lot of people's favorites. Jehovah Roy. The Lord is our shepherd. This name comes from a psalm that really needs no introductions. It's probably the most recognized book in the Bible by anybody and everybody. And it's the wonderful psalm of the King David. And that's, of course, Psalm 23. You know that one that begins, The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's a little bitty short thing. A little longer than this, but not by much. We are all familiar with, or have at least heard of, a lot of the I am statements that Jesus made, especially the one that fits this particular name. And when we look at it, just briefly, it tells us in John 10, 11 through 18, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep, which are not of this fold. I must bring them also. And they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it again. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay down on my own initiative. And I have authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. Jesus put it so plainly that there could be no mistaking what he meant. He fulfills the idea and ideal of the shepherd-like care for the people of God as illustrated in the Old Testament and in that culture. Shepherds may take a lot of risk for the safety of the sheep, but it is really probably pretty rare when you're going to find one that's going to lay his life down at all and willing to die for those sheep. That bad shepherd will not defend the sheep, and he thinks that the flock exists for their own personal existence. But the good shepherd lives and dies for the good of the sheep. The good shepherd sacrifices for those sheep. We think of the sheep as all being the same, but when you really think about it, the sheep are not the same. The shepherd knows that they are individuals with their own little personalities. Even in here, we all have our own little personalities, whether they're little quirks, weird senses of humor, or what have you. We are all the same, but we're different. We have our own little characteristics. The good shepherd is known by the sheep, and we know David pretty well. He's the one that I think that in the entire Bible we can identify the most with. because he was, after all, the man after God's own heart. And yet we can look at him and say, yeah, it is so wonderful. I want to do everything I can for God. I want to be like that. And then we look at David and we go, oh my gosh, but he did so many things that were messed up. And God still said he was a man after my own heart. And God blessed him, and God took care of him, and God did everything that was necessary for him. All in all, he may have been a scoundrel, but name one of us that hasn't been. And God still loved him, and God still protected him. David, he came to know the Lord as Jehovah Roy through so many valleys and caves and in times of need. And we see this all throughout the Psalms. And when we sit there and think about it, and we think about that wonderful Psalm 23, it only has 6 little verses. But like I said, it's one of those that everybody's kind of familiar with. You may not be able to quote it verbatim, but you're familiar with it. Yeah, I see Caroline over there going, yes, I can. How would So Psalm 23, verses 1 through 6. A psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As stated previously, this is one of the most well-known verses in the Bible. It's the only little bitty thing, Psalm 23. It's only these little short 6 verses, but in those 6 verses that probably didn't take David very long to write is packed with so much good and so much stuff that when we look at it and we concentrate's not a good word, and we dwell upon it, we see just so much stuff of what God does for us. And we'll look at this a little bit later near the end of the message and show that all the names of God that we have looked at are packed in these 6 verses. Now we know that, well, David, he wrote this near the end of his life. And it gave the chance for him to actually reflect and dwell on what his life experiences were. Old J. Vernon McGee, he wrote well on this psalm, saying that it's not the language of philosophy. It is not the language of theology. It is not a legal or scientific document. It is sublimely simple and simply sublime. Dr. Frank Morgan added and has called this the Song of the Old Shepherd. I kind of like that, and I agree with it. David was the king that never forgot David the shepherd boy. Never forgot. In Psalm 23, you do not have the musings of a green, inexperienced individual, but the mature deliberations of ripe experience. You see, David, when he came close to the end of his life, he looked back upon the checkered career, and it was then that he wrote this song. The old king on the throne remembered the shepherd boy. The life had beaten, battered, baffled, and bludgeoned this man. He was a hardened soldier and a veteran who knew victory, privation, hardship. He knew song and shadow. He was tested and tried. Therefore, in Psalm 23, we do not have the theorizing of immaturity, but the fruit and the mature judgment born of a long life. That's what we have here. Now, I kind of remember that it wasn't that long ago, probably last week when I took the time off for my hand to heal a little bit, that we watched Fiddler on the Roof again. And it kind of reminded me of David and this psalm. You remember when old Tevye, who was sitting there and he was looking in his daughter's eyes, and they were standing next to the people they wanted to marry, and he would sit there and he would be all upset. You know, who do you think you are? And then he'd go, but then I look in my daughter's eyes.
Yep.
On the one hand, I see the promise, I see the hope, I see this. But on the other hand, I see this, this, and this. And on this hand, and on the other hand. And we know he's talking to himself, but he's also talking to God at the same time. And then he does all this fancy thing. And then he points to the sky and says, tradition. But here, I think it's a little different. It's close. It's close, but it's a little different. I think if David was to point his hands to the sky, he would say, oh God, my God, thank you for being there. Because you see, looking at the psalm, we see that on the one hand, David speaks of green pastures. Yet on the other hand, he speaks of the valleys of death. On the one hand, he speaks of the quiet waters. On the other, being in the presence of his enemies. He knew and had experienced it all. Yet through the bliss and the trials, David experienced Jehovah Roy with him, and that was what made the difference. The Lord my shepherd is with me. He could write, so I will fear no evil. Have you experienced that? Can you absorb that and put it into practical application on a daily basis? The Lord is my shepherd. I will fear nothing. What do you think were some of the experiences that David looked at as he was writing this wonderful 6-verse psalm? Which I would love to have heard the music that went with it, personally. What were the experiences that David had which taught him so much about this great shepherd who watches over the lives of all the people that are his? As the aged David looked back over his life, he could see the many different times that God was there, that God was the shepherd and protected him and did all these wonderful things. Jehovah Roy upheld him. What do you think he was thinking about? Well, there are some things that I thought about when it came to this. Some things that, well, could have been on his mind as he wrote this little psalm. His experiences as a young shepherd boy, we'll start off with those, who cared for the sheep and trusted to his care and protected them from the bear and the lion. He was willing to lay down his life for those sheep. 1 Samuel 17, 34 through 37. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. His experience with the larger two-legged bear who defied the armies of Israel and the amazing victory God gave him over that giant Goliath. 1 Samuel 17:45. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted." His short-lived fame before fleeing from his life from the hand of the jealous javelin-throwing King Saul, yet while out in the wilderness, living in caves and uncertainty, God was with him the whole way. And did you notice that while David was running from Saul, that he had the opportunity to be around Saul a couple of times? And did David take his life? No. What did David say? "I will not touch the Lord's anointed." It's up to him to take care of this situation. God was with him the whole way, the great shepherd preparing David for what was to come. Many of David's psalms come out of the questions and difficulty of this period in his life. For example, you can look at Psalm 57 and 59 and 142, and they tell you the experiences that he was dealing with during this struggle. He will rise to be king over all of Israel. David himself would become Israel's great shepherd, putting into practice the very lessons that God, the one true shepherd, had taught him. His enemies that rose up against him, while nations rose up against Israel and were defeated by David and his amazing men, there was one enemy that hurt more than all the others. For this enemy came from his own flesh, that betrayal and subsequent downfall of his own dear son Absalom. Yet God remained close, even when his own family betrayed him. 2 Samuel 18, 32 and 33. Then the king said to the Cushite, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" And the Cushite answered, "Let the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be as that young man." The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept, and thus said as he walked, "O my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." I can imagine Jesus knew who was going to betray him. One of his own. And you wonder if his heart broke as well, even though he knew it had to take place. Another example would be Psalm 3. And maybe David thought after his later years how God had brought him through so many trials and so many enemies and so many dealings. Yet he could rejoice in this shepherd who had held him and would not let him go. And thus, as he wrote another psalm, Psalm 37, and we're going to look at Psalm 37, verse 23 and 26, through 26. "The steps of a man are established by the Lord, and he delights in his way. When he falls, he will not be hurled headlong, because the Lord is the one who holds his hand. I have been young, and now I am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, or his descendants begging bread. All day long he is gracious and lends, and his descendants are a blessing." So David rejoiced Jehovah Roy, his shepherd, in so many ways. What about you? Are you learning from this one who upholds his own in their journey through life? As we read Psalm 23, we can see that David started the psalm by linking these two thoughts together. The Lord is my shepherd, so I shall not want. Psalm 23 gives a great summary of the wonderful provision of God as Jehovah Roy. But as we look at it again, ask yourself this question. In that first statement, what shall I not want? The Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I shall not want for rest. Boy, just back that up. I shall not want for rest, because he makes me lie down in green pastures. For peace, for he leads me beside still waters. For forgiveness, because he restores my soul. For guidance, for he leads me in paths of righteousness. Companionship, for you are with me. Comfort, for your rod and thy staff comfort me. Provision, for thou prepare a table before me. And joy. And joy, you anoint my head with oil, and my cup runs over. Everything in time, for goodness and mercy shall follow me. Everything in eternity, for I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Those are the things you should not want for. He provides them. Like we said earlier, the names, compound names that we had looked at so far of God, they're all in this psalm. And we're going to see the encouragement God provided David as well to us. A quick reminder of the names. Their meaning: Jehovah Jireh, our provider; Jehovah Rapha, our healer; Jehovah Nissi, our banner; Jehovah Shalom, our peace; Jehovah Sedek, our righteousness; Jehovah Shammah, the Lord is there; and Jehovah Roy, our shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. Well, that's Jehovah Roy, the great shepherd, of course. I shall not want. Again, Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Jireh, our provider. He makes us lie down in green pastures. Again, Jehovah Jireh, our provider, and Jehovah Shalom, our peace. He leads me beside quiet waters. Well, definitely Jehovah Shalom, our peace. He restores my soul. Jehovah Rapha, our healer and restorer. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Jehovah Sedek, our righteousness. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Again, Jehovah Shalom, peace instead of fear in difficult times. For you are with me, Jehovah Shammah. He who is there present with us. Your rod and your staff comfort me, Jehovah Shalom. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Jehovah Nissi, our victor and our banner. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Jehovah Jireh, our provider. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life. Well, that's all of them. That's all of them combined. Jireh, Roy, Shalom, Sedek, Nissi, Shammah, and Rapha. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Finally, his presence for all time, Jehovah Shammah, the one who is present and there with his people. When we look at David's life and this wonderful psalm that he penned, it is so applicable for everything that we need in our lives. And it shows us how much God is there for everything. You see, he experienced more than just the shepherd. He experienced all these other names and what God provided and did for him. And it's the same thing that God does for us because we are his people. Let's go to prayer.